Hello, my name's Karen Hustler and I'm the Assistant Director of Fellowship and Awards at Advance HE. Accreditation Criterion 2 is about the design of the programme. So we're looking to see how the programme or scheme that's being put forward is designed so that participants will understand how the UK PSF and the dimensions of practice are embedded within the content of the programme, within the activities they take part in, and how the assessment on the programme or scheme has been designed to make sure that the descriptor is part of the assessment criteria on that programme, or if it's an experienced application for fellowship from somebody who's a longer serving member of staff, how their assessment format has been designed around the descriptor requirements. So thinking about the design of the programme, it's really important to think about what each of the descriptors is looking for. And in a programme where there might be a chance to get associate fellowship before fellowship on perhaps a structured credit-bearing programme, thinking about what descriptor 1 is and how that is going to be assessed at a midpoint on the programme before then participants go on to engage more thoroughly to gain that broad understanding, look for at descriptor 2. So each part has got to have its own identity, the assessment has got to be very specifically designed around that descriptor, and it's got to be very clear how the judgment process is going to operate. We're not looking for each of the activities on a programme to specifically be aligned to lots of dimensions. It's really important that the participant, who won't be an expert in the standards framework itself, starts to understand how their professional practice links to different elements of the descriptor and how the assessment is going to all bring it together so that by the end of that programme they will have addressed all the requirements of that descriptor and be ready to be awarded fellowship. In an experience scheme, then we're likely to have perhaps experienced staff who've been influencing and impacting on their colleagues' practice going for senior fellowship. And they need to show success at this, which implies sustained period of doing it. So mentoring 1 or 2 people is not going to be sufficient for senior fellowship. But if they can talk about how they've been engaged in mentoring and supporting their colleagues over a longer period of time, they'll be able to then show the impact that's made on their colleagues' practice and on student learning. You can use any of our guidance. So we have a lot of guidance around our own direct application, and in particular the dimensions of the framework document really sets out the typical kind of activities that people will be engaged in at associate fellow, fellow and senior fellow. And you're very welcome to use any of that guidance. Often it's really important to think about motivating your colleagues to want to engage in these programmes and schemes. And so thinking about visual diagrams, little vignettes of typical types of people that might go through the programme and which category of fellowship they might have gone for really help to bring these things to life. So I really recommend you think about how you're going to encourage and motivate your staff to engage and to want to get the award of fellowship at the end of it. And if you've got people who are mentoring or reviewing, if the guidance for participants is really thorough and explains everything around the process of engagement and how they're going to be assessed, then you don't need separate guides for these people. It's really important when it comes to the accreditation submission that whatever you design as the assessment is going to really assess all elements of the descriptor in the way that it should be accurately assessed. So for associate fellowship, it's about that specific engagement with 2 areas of activity. For descriptor 2, it's about that broad understanding across all the different dimensions of the framework and their evidence base for what they're doing, how they know it works, evaluating what's happening in learning, and doing this within the appropriate framework for quality for their setting, which of course in the UK might be to do with the framework for higher education qualifications, but in other parts of the world will be different national frameworks. So the design for the assessment must test all the elements of the descriptor to make sure that the category of fellowship they've applied for forms the basis of that assessment. And as part of it, we ask that there's an assessment to authenticate their practice. Now, this can either be at descriptors 1 and 2 for associate fellowship and fellowship. It may be a formal observation undertaken by an expert peer. So somebody who's experienced within their disciplinary area or experienced in teaching and learning outside their disciplinary area. But those people must have an understanding of the UK PSF and about fellowship, so that they're making an appropriate judgment about the practice that the person is writing about in their assessment or in their application for fellowship, that actually that is reflective of what they're doing in their teaching and learning practice with students or with colleagues if it's for senior fellowship. The alternative to having an observation is to have supporting statements, and we set out requirements for the number of those in our accreditation policy in section 4.2. So I recommend that you have a look at that. For Associate Fellow, 1 supporting statement, for Fellowship, 2 supporting statements, Senior Fellowship, 2 supporting statements, which will be reflective of their influence and impact on their colleagues' practice, not their own teaching and learning with students directly. So a formal observation is not what we would look for at Senior Fellowship. For Principal Fellowship, which is a very challenging category of fellowship, we only have 45 institutions at this moment in time in 2019 that are accredited to award Principal Fellowship, as it is a very challenging and different category of fellowship. For Principal Fellowship, we would look for 3 advocate statements, and those are people that champion the applicant and speak about why they should be accepted as a Principal Fellow. For all of these supporting statements, we have guidance and templates on our website, and you're very welcome to adapt those and to brand those with your own university badges. But at least please look at our guidance so that you make sure the guidance you're giving referees lines up with our expectation for that. And the same thing with your format for assessment. You may have a different format to assessment to us, but we do set out our word limit expectations in our policy. So please make sure that you design something that has equivalence to that. So for example, for Senior Fellowship, we ask that there's around a 6,000 word format if it's a written application. If it's a dialogic assessment instead, then it may be based on a portfolio of evidence and involve a dialogue of around 40 to 45 minutes with some questioning. So that will give you an idea of our expectation for the amount of evidence you would expect from one of the applicants. We also would want you to talk about the resubmission process and the design of that, so that participants are very clear about the process involved. When you're designing your programme and writing in the accreditation submission template the accompanying narrative to go with all your participant-facing handbooks and guidance, it's really important to keep cross-referencing to the policy and to our guidance document that goes with it. At the back of the guidance document, you'll find some common conditions that universities have had set when they've gone through the accreditation review process. And in an ideal world, we'd really like to be able to review your programmes and schemes and not set any conditions from the accreditation panel review. So please keep cross-referencing and referring closely to our guidance.